Hi there, and welcome to my Fashion Stories Box podcast, a podcast about stories in fashion history. I am Catherine, and I'm so glad to welcome you here. Let's discover together interesting facts about fashion and history and fashion history. Marie Antoinette, a character we learned to hate as kids since the first history class. Mind you, she's the one responsible of the French Revolution. She's the foreigner who spent all the money of the Kingdom of France to buy sumptuous clothes, while the poor French people was dying from hunger. She's the one with a decadent way of life who would ruin the French monarchy. Between us, as if the French monarchy just waited for her to be decadent. How comes, though, that Marie Antoinette is one of the most emblematic sources of inspiration for fashion designers? What makes her so unique? In this new episode of my Fashion Stories Box podcast, we will try to learn more about the woman behind the queen. We'll dive in her childhood at the court of Vienna to understand her personality. We will see how Marie Antoinette would use fashion to impose herself and the many controversies she created through the different styles she launched. We will try to understand why the French revolutionaries hated her so much, and who wields her legacy to the fashion and haute couture world. Marie Antoinette Joseph Jeanne de Habsbourg-Lorraine was born in November 1755. She was the 15th child of Francis I, Emperor of the Holy Roman Empire, and of Marie-Thérèse of Austria. She spent all her childhood at the court of Vienna, surrounded by her siblings and the love of her parents. The little Antonia, as she was nicknamed, had a very simple life. The etiquette at the court of Vienna was quite laxist, with no strict rules or protocols to bend to. She was a free kid who received the basic education girls of her generation would receive, bearing and appearance classes, dance and music. The bare minimum. Intellectual topics weren't part of the agenda, to such an extent that at the age of 10, she barely knew how to read and write in German, at a very beginner level of French, and more or less understood Italian, a language she learned almost alone thanks to her love for Italian operas. No wonder she developed an interest towards activities considered as superfluous. Her simple childhood, even as a daughter of a monarch, didn't really prepare her to the tsunami that would be her wedding to the future King of France and her arrival inside the nest of vipers that was the court of Versailles. Marie Antoinette also had a simple personality. She was said to be joyful, playful, charming, and used to live without constraints. And this won't fit for Versailles. From a physical point of view, she was ash blonde with blue eyes and a Roman nose and a fresh complexion described as of lilies and roses. And she was said to be very graceful with a particular beauty. Even the young Mozart, who would have met her on October 1762, would fall in love with her, ask to marry her at the age of 6. How cute! When she arrived at Versailles, people marveled about the way she would walk. It was not walking, it was as if she was sliding. The dance classes of her childhood gave results. And basically, this was what was expected from a woman of her station, being beautiful, gracious, and having children. Intelligence was unnecessary. However, when in an effort to strengthen political relationships between the Kingdom of France and the Holy Roman Empire, and the choice of Marie Antoinette to become the next Queen of France, her education was considered too light by Versailles. French King Louis XV sent specialists to make her speak fluent French, but also to improve her physical appearance, especially her teeth and her style. Her wedding with the future King of France would be celebrated by proxy on April 19, 1770, after her first menstruation and thus her readiness to be married and ability to bear children. Few weeks later, Marie Antoinette would leave forever the court of Vienna to join the one of Versailles and have a real wedding with her future husband. The moment she entered the French territory, as per the tradition, she would have to leave all her Austrian belongings, including her clothes, and to be dressed following the French fashion of the time. This event acted as a ritual. By physically leaving her belongings, she was leaving behind her previous life, her previous identity, her childhood. Now speaking only French, and she would really insist on that part, and dressed the French way, Marie Antoinette went on her journey through the kingdom, being warmly welcomed by the people all along, all happy to see a beautiful and smiling young woman to become the future Queen of France and to give hers to the throne. She would reach Paris, and on May 16, 1770, at the age of 14 years, she would officially marry Louis Auguste, the Dauphin and future Louis XVI. She was young, she was beautiful. Life seemed easy at first. Everybody liked her. Everybody? Well, not really. The simple people from the countryside who welcomed her throughout her journey to Paris liked her, at least at first. Louis XV liked her and would spend time with her, trying to educate her to political matters. However, the remaining of the court, the aristocracy, didn't warm up to her. She was the Austrian, the foreigner. The official mistress of the king, the famous Countess du Barry, didn't like her, and it was mutual. Her husband, Louis, didn't appreciate her much, and Marie Antoinette would soon feel pretty alone and overwhelmed by the rigidity and the heaviness of the Versailles etiquette. In 1774, Louis XV would die. Louis Auguste would be crowned King of France and known as Louis XVI. At 18 years old, Marie Antoinette became Queen of France, for the best and for the worst. Marie Antoinette is now known as a fashion icon, a fashion victim even. But at her arrival at the court of Versailles in 1770, this destiny won't be obvious right away. She was young, 14 years old, far from her family, impressive, and a bit at lost. She would of course have a wardrobe full of many items. Her wedding trousseau counted around 100 dresses. However, the elements of this wardrobe would follow the old fashion. As future Queen of France, she couldn't really dress the way she really wanted. Appearance was everything. The woman in charge of her wardrobe was the Duchess de Villars, a person who was already in charge of the late Queen's wardrobe, Marilyn Zitska, who died 30 years ago. Poor Marie Antoinette was stuck with court dresses from a time before her birth even. Complete old-fashioned styles and cuts which didn't suit her physiognomy. No matter how luxurious or well-cut the dress was, Marie Antoinette always looked badly dressed. Not being the Queen of France yet, she couldn't choose the fashion merchants and textile providers she would have wanted to work with. Marie Antoinette was maybe young, but she wasn't stupid. During the many events taking place at Versailles, she did notice that the other ladies were pretty well dressed, nothing to keep the comparison with what she had to wear. After some research, she would learn that all of these women would have their dresses done by the same person, a certain Mademoiselle Rose Bertin. If you have been listening to the podcast for a while, you know that I dedicated an episode to Rose Bertin, the first fashion designer in history, at least for me. And I encourage you to listen or listen again to this episode to discover more about the life of this exceptional woman nicknamed the Minister of Fashion. To come back to Marie Antoinette, after having learned the name of Rose Bertin, she would jump at the bit for the moment when finally she would be able to have dresses from her. The moment will come 4 years later. In 1774, the King Louis XV died, and Marie Antoinette's husband will become Louis XVI. The king is dead. Long life to the king! Marie Antoinette becomes Queen of France and is now free to do whatever she wants, including wearing dresses she likes. In July 1774, a secret meeting is organized between Marie Antoinette and the most famous fashion merchant, Rose Bertin. We have a testimony of this meeting from Madame Campan, first lady's maid of Marie Antoinette. She wrote, quote, "This is during the first trip to Marly that Madame the Duchess de Chartres, who became since Duchess d'Orléans, introduced in the private rooms of the Queen Mademoiselle Rose Bertin, fashion merchant who became famous at that time through the radical change she introduced in the dresses of French ladies." Unquote. And change was exactly what Marie Antoinette was looking for. She wanted to be more beautiful and more important than the Du Barry, the former king's mistress and her enemy. With Rose Bertin at her side, she would develop a true passion for fashion, and soon she would understand its power to affirm her new role as the Queen of the Kingdom of France. The Countess de Boigne would even say about Marie Antoinette, quote, "Being the most fashionable woman was the title she found the most desirable." Unquote. Very far from the simple Austrian girl who arrived very shy at the court of Versailles 4 years earlier. Marie Antoinette will have many occasions to practice her new fashion influence. Indeed, knowing her interest to these kinds of activities, Louis XVI will charge her with organizing the pleasures of the court. And Marie Antoinette will love it. She was a big fan of theater, comedy, gaming, dance, and music, and she will take very seriously the responsibility given by her husband by developing a weekly program of festivities with 2 balls, including 1 masquerade ball and 2 theater plays. Just as much occasions for her to establish her reputation as fashion influencer. Indeed, it was completely out of question to be seen wearing the same dress several times, a bit as today and modern fashion influencers on Instagram or TikTok. I'm sure Marie Antoinette would have loved social media and the rise of virtual closets. Her meetings with Rose Bertin at the Regents, taking place twice a week, will become daily, and this up to 1789, when things would become a bit more complicated on the political side. Of course, the reactionary society of the court won't see this from a good eye. Our dear Madame Campan would even write later, quote, "The Queen, until that moment, had developed a very simple taste for the dress, and then it started to become her main occupation." Unquote. The time has gone when the young future queen could be easily manipulated by them. Marie Antoinette started to show her true personality. She became consumed by her passion for touching the fabrics, the fittings, the alterations, and the experimentations. Fashion will become excessive in style, in volumes. The robe à la française, French-style court dress, will become so wide, with panier underneath going up to 5 meters, it would be almost impossible to go through the frames of the doors. In a very short period of time, Marie Antoinette would introduce so many styles, so many variations. It was almost impossible to follow everything. The robe à la française, the robe à la polonaise, the robe à la Marlborough, the robe à l'anglaise, the caraco, the indienne, the Orient-inspired dress, the robe en bergère inspired by the countryside, and of course, the famous and scandalous robe à la reine I'll talk about a bit later. In his memoir, the Marquis de Malfont would write about 250 ways to decorate a dress, each way having a poetic name. Indeed, the way people had to name a color or to describe a fashion was quite original and creative, to say the least. A color looking like the hair of the queen was called couleur cheveux de la reine, color hair of the queen. Another, looking like the eye of the king, kind of blue-gray, was called œil de roi, eye of king. And these color names were quite fine, but what about the color flea? A mix of brown, purple, and red. And you had variations for that flea color. Color flea leg, color flea stomach, color frightened flea. Or let me give you examples of variations of gray. American gray, steel gray, slate gray, pearl gray. Brown was called burnt soot, and my favorite, London's chimney's soot color. Other very poetic and less poetic names. Dolphin caca, goose sheet, muffled sides, tides of a moved nymph. I don't know how it sounds in English, but in French it sounds somewhat poetic, but also quite ridiculous. It is, at least with our modern mind, but I'm pretty sure it was also the case at that time for outsiders. And if we read descriptions of how people were dressed at that time, it's a bit confusing. I'm going to try to translate for you in English the description of a lady published in the Journal Politique et Littérature of May 1776. Madame was lately at the opera, wearing a dress muffled side, embellished with superfluous regrets, with a point in the middle of perfect ingenuousness, a marked attention, shoes, hair of the queen, embroidered with diamonds in treacherous manners, and an emerald Venez ivoire, hair curled in sustained fillings, with a cap guaranteed conquest, ornated with fickle feathers and with ribbons of depressed eyes, and with a cat on the shoulder, color people freshly arrived. Behind a Medici mounted in good manners, with a despair of opal and a muff of brief agitation. I don't know if it makes any sense in English, but believe me, it makes no much sense in French. I read the original French text to my mother and she burst into laugh at almost every word, so we know no more if we talk about colors, about physical characteristics, about descriptions. There is a sense of poesy, though, in this description, an old-fashioned poesy, something precious. We don't understand, but maybe it was meant not to be understood, at least not by everybody. It's the language of the court of Versailles during the 18th century, a code only insiders could understand. And in a sense, it gives us an insight of the pit which separated the aristocracy and the commoners, two incompatible people with nothing in common. And the vocabulary was also used to reinforce these differences, this non-belongingness. Each season, Marie Antoinette would have 36 new outfits. At that time, they counted 3 seasons per year. Each season, then, she would have 12 new grands habits, understand court dresses, 12 new luxury dresses on white pannier, and 12 new fancy little dresses for afternoon activities. And this was without taking into account dresses for specific occasions, to hunt, to ride horses. And her favorite colors were pastel tones like blue, lilac, pink, white, aqua, and she liked floral prints and stripes. Extravagance and volume won't be reserved only for dresses. Hairstyles will also fall under this criteria. And for that, Marie Antoinette will be helped by her official hairdresser, Monsieur Léonard. Surfing on the beauty standards of the time, according to which a tall hairstyle implied to have your hair pulled up, thus smoothing your facial features, making you looking younger, Botox before the age of Botox, Monsieur Léonard would compose the tallest wigs possible, wigs which were called pouf. They could reach up to almost 2 meters, forcing women to travel on their knees when using carriages. Incidents would easily happen with wigs catching fire when coming close to the ceiling lights. The pouf at the origin was a sort of padding filled with horsehair and gauze to add extra volume, on the top of which hairs would be added and decorated with different types of objects, included but not limited to ribbons, flowers, fruits, stuffed animals, livened up with a cap. Around 200 different types of caps existed, and topped with feathers. Women were crazy about feathers at that time, especially ostrich feathers, who would be worn in groups of 3 or 10 to accentuate the volume. And a pouf could cost up to 50,000 livres, around 899,770 euros, and to be worn only a few days. As for colors, the poufs could also have sweet names, for example, Au lever de la reine, à la levée of the queen, à la Gabrielle de Vergy, au chien couchant, à la lying dog, au parc anglais, à la English park, à la victoire, à la victory. The most famous style of pouf was called à la belle poule. This wig was inspired by a victory won in the Americas by Lafayette while being on board of a boat called La Belle Poule. The wig would feature a boat with its sails on the top of a pile of hairs. You also had poufs called pouf au sentiment. This type of wigs would feature the portrait of a person you liked. A great way to declare your feelings, and a good idea for Valentine's Day, no? Under their extravagant and superfluous aspects, these wigs were, and especially their ornamentations, would also follow the current events. Any of them would become a subject of decoration. It was the true delusions of grandeur to which Marie Antoinette succumbed, leading the way for the other ladies of the court to follow. Everything had to be the most extravagant and the richest possible. And for that, Marie Antoinette would have her dream team composed of Rose Bertin as her official designer and Monsieur Léonard as her official hairdresser. Marie Antoinette's craze for volume and extreme experimentations in fashion would last a few years. I guess she used it as a way to visually assert her new position as queen, to show who was in charge, to show she had the power. But I also think that it was a way for her to compensate the lack of love in her personal life. Indeed, it wasn't a big love between her and Louis XVI. They got married when they were teenagers, and the future king of France seemed not to be very interested in consuming his wedding and bedding his wife. It is said that he was unexperimented. Yes, maybe, but honestly, I have doubts about it, knowing about his grandfather's, Louis XV's lifestyle and the old tradition of mistresses and initiations at the court for kings. He was just maybe too shy, and they didn't really get along well. Moreover, Marie Antoinette wasn't especially attracted by her husband neither. So they didn't force each other and went on with the appearances. However, an heir was asked. Years went by, and no babies. Rumors started to spread about the infertility of one or the sterility of the other. Being afraid that her daughter would be repudiated, Marie-Thérèse of Austria sent her son, Joseph, to Versailles to understand what was happening. We don't really know what Joseph told to his sister and brother-in-law, what he did, what he explained, but the fact is that his visit was crowned with success. 1 year later, in 1777, Marie Antoinette gave birth to her first child, a little girl. Instead of rejoicing, other rumors spread. This birth came too fast. It's not possible that Louis XVI was the father. Not to mention that another rumor spread about Marie Antoinette having a lover, the handsome, or said to be Hans Axel de Fersen. She would have met during a masquerade in 1774. It was really difficult to satisfy people at that time. No baby, no happy. A baby, no happy, the king is not the father. But Marie Antoinette becoming a mother, and she would have 4 children in all, only 2 would survive, and the royal couple is said to have adopted 4 other kids. Losing 2 of her children, mourning them, will have a strong impact on her personality and on her fashion style. She would long for a simple way of life, closer to the life she had as a kid at the court of Vienna. At heart, she was a simple woman, loving the countryside. Her sanctuary will be the Petit Trianon, a small castle inside the gardens of Versailles Louis XVI offered her. There she would hide from the etiquette of the court, from the life and the gossips she disliked. She would recreate a bucolic atmosphere close to the countryside life, to the point that she would even have a farm with animals and a garden with fruits and vegetables. There, she didn't have to play the role of the Queen of France. She could be her true self, enjoying her life as a woman and as a mother without all the fuss and intermediaries the protocol imposed her. Maybe tired of the excesses she imposed in the dress, maybe desiring to prove her all-powerful influence on the fashion of her time, or maybe genuinely in the search for a lifestyle closer to her true personality, the result is that she will introduce simpler dresses. This change in dress style will become obvious starting from 1783, few years before the Revolution. Rose Bertin will design white dresses with no embellishment, with no volume, whose cuts will be inspired by peasant dresses. They will be worn together with straw hats. They would be comfortable, the type of dresses Marie Antoinette would wear at the Petit Trianon when she would be with her children and receiving her friends. But this style didn't please neither. Mind you, this dress, which would be called robe en chemise, chemise à la reine, or robe en gaule, would be considered being too simple, too vulgar to be worn by the Queen of France. They didn't fit with her being the face, the physical representation of the wealth of the kingdom. The scandal burst in August 1783, and the origin of it was a portrait painted by Elisabeth Vigée-Lebrun, the official portraitist of the Queen. As every year, to celebrate the Day of St. Louis, an exhibition was organized at the Louvre. A series of paintings was shown, including one representing Marie Antoinette wearing a dress called robe en gaule, a large straw hat embellished with a grey ribbon and some ostrich feathers. She holds the grey ribbon in her hands linked to a rose. She is represented on a dark background. Everything breathes simplicity. The dress she is wearing, the robe en gaule, is a soft dress made of white threads, trimmed with muslin at the collar and wrists. The waist, a bit higher than the regular level, is marked by a light transparent yellow scarf. This dress is the precursor of the post-revolution high-waisted dresses women would wear until the first decades of the 19th century. And you might know it better as the Empire dress or the Regency dress. But nobody was ready for this dress yet. The public was shocked to see the Queen of France being shown in such a dress. This dress was perceived as scandalous, vulgar, a night dress, a dress for a chambermaid at best, but certainly not for a queen. The lightness of a dress, the lightness of a style Marie Antoinette wanted to adopt, wasn't compatible with her status of queen. This dress makes her too close to the commoners. It makes her too accessible. The distinction between her and her subjects is abolished, and it's something that can't be permitted, or at least not displayed under the eyes of everybody. She was the Queen of France. She was representing the Kingdom of France, and consequently, she had to be represented wearing the most magnificent costumes, which would act as a testimony of the wealth and power of the kingdom. The scale of the scandal was such that the portrait had to be taken away. It was replaced by another one. Same woman, same pose, same rose, different dress. In this similar new portrait, Marie Antoinette wears an opulent robe à la française in a grey London chimney suit color silk, featuring lace at the neckline, framing the overskirt, and engageant at the bottom of the sleeves. A satin bow ornates the bodice of the dress. She is wearing a headpiece in silk called turban with feathers, as well as a two-row pearl necklace. She is still holding the same rose in her hands, but the background features a lush garden. A look more in conformity with the idea of what the queen of a powerful kingdom as France should look like. Extravagant or simple, Marie Antoinette's fashion style is equally controversial. No matter what she would do, it would never be right. And simplicity in dress doesn't mean that it is less expensive. On the contrary. In 4 years, her dress expenses would go from 30,000 livres, around 539,800 euros, in 1776, to 108,000 livres, around 1,943,500 euros in 1780. Some testimonies talk about 260,000 livres, around 5,678,800 euros even, meaning around approximately 389,900 euros to spend per month on dresses. Not to forget her passion for gaming sessions where she could spend days and also lose lots of money. All of this will badly influence her reputation, and she will be soon nicknamed Madame Deficit. Another event would completely finish her: the scandal of the Queen's necklace, which took place between 1784 and 1786. In that story, she was more the victim of a fraud than anything else, but the wrong was already done. In May 1789, due to the failures of reforms introduced by the king and his ministers, the General Estates, an extraordinary assembly comprising representatives of the clergy, the nobility, and the commoners, are summoned. The storm of the Bastille, which was a prison at that time, on July the 14th the same year, would become the most famous episode of the popular contestation and the symbolic start of the French Revolution. The negotiations toward the end of class privilege and feudal rights would lead to the adoption of a constitution in 1791 for the creation of a constitutional monarchy, which could have saved the royal family. However, Louis XVI vetoed this decision. In August 1792, the monarchy is abolished, the First French Republic is created, and the royal family is arrested and transferred to the Prison du Temple. All along the process, Marie Antoinette would try to contact her brothers and sisters to ask for help to maintain her husband's position as King of France. Projects of evasion of the royal family would also be set up, all in vain. On January 15, 1793, the Revolutionary Convention proclaimed a death sentence for the former king, Louis XVI, now known as Citizen Louis Capet, and he would be beheaded on January 21st, 1793. Few months later, in August 1793, Marie Antoinette would be transferred to the Conciergerie. She would be separated from her children. Her health would worsen. She was losing blood. Nobody really knew what was going on. Was the bleeding due to a cancer of the uterus or a cancer of the cervix or maybe a fibroma? But the results were that she was condemned and wouldn't live long anyway. Robespierre, one of the most emblematic faces of the French Revolution and the period of terror which followed, would have his personal doctor to monitor the health of the former queen. Knowing that she won't survive anyway, he decided to bring forward the trial of Marie Antoinette. On October the 14th, 1793, Marie Antoinette's trial opened. She would be accused of incest, of betrayal, and of alliance with foreign powers against the interest of France. She would be compared to previous queens of France revolutionaries hated, maybe for their too big power and influence, or maybe because they were just women with power, as Catherine of Medici. She would be shown as the declared enemy of the French nation, crystallizing all the hatred French revolutionaries had for the royal family. On October 16, 1793, in the early morning, she would be sentenced to death penalty for high treason and would be beheaded the same day. Marie Antoinette was 37 years old. She would have written a last letter for her children who never received it, and her last words were for her executioner when, accidentally, While walking towards the guillotine, she would have stepped on his feet and would have said, "Mister, I beg your pardon. I didn't mean to do it." Marie Antoinette died alone, hated by everybody, the scapegoat of the French Revolution. Little did she know that few centuries later she would become a major source of inspiration, a pop icon whose life and fashion style would inspire plenty of films and fashion designers, and that, at her level, she went on the work started by Louis XIV in the positioning of France as the heart of fashion and luxury, setting the basis for the development of the haute couture industry. The many styles she set up with the help of Rose Bertin would be sent to the other courts in Europe, thus participating in the influence of France and of the French fashion industry. Around 68 movies would be released about her and her time. You may know maybe the most famous one, Marie Antoinette by Sofia Coppola. Chanel, Alexander McQueen, Rochas, Oscar de la Renta, Vivienne Westwood, Christian Lacroix, John Galliano for Dior are some of the names in the fashion industry who paid tribute to the first fashionista. However, Marie Antoinette's legacy is not limited to the fashion world. Did you know that she was the one to bring the croissant to France? Now one of the emblem of France, the croissant was at the origins a pastry invented in Vienna to celebrate a victory over the Ottoman army at the end of the 17th century. The form of the pastry was chosen as an echo to the crescent featured on the Ottoman flag. She would also launch the balneology, herself being quite conscious of her hygiene, bathing regularly, doing long strolls, spending as much time as possible outside, breathing fresh air. Think about Marie Antoinette next time you will enjoy a croissant. And this episode is my own tribute to a woman who was a victim of her time, who was a victim because she was too visible and too influent, who was a victim because she was simply a woman. And while preparing this episode, I learned to love her, at least to appreciate her. She was beheaded because she was the foreigner, because she didn't dress and behave the way she was expected to. She was a victim of fashion, which became highly political. Words and situations which unfortunately still happen today. Thank you very much for listening. I hope you enjoyed this episode of my Fashion Stories Box podcast dedicated to Marie Antoinette, maybe one of the most controversial figures of modern history. I hope this episode gave another perspective of her life, her personality, and how, through her experimentations, she put the haute couture industry on its modern tracks. Feel free to subscribe to the podcast wherever you listen your podcasts, to connect with me on Instagram and Facebook, to complete the podcast with some visuals. And if you like my podcast, feel free to leave a comment or a review. I would really appreciate it. I am Catherine, and this is my Fashion Story Box podcast, a podcast about stories in fashion history. See you next time for a new Fashion Story Box.